Despite what it may seem like, since this is my second SC scouting report between my last 4 videos, I'm actually not a South Carolina fan. However, if I am watching film on a prospect and find a player I absolutely fall in love with, I am absolutely going to make a scouting report on them. Since 2017, since I began scouting, my top sleepers of each class have consisted of Ben Burke-Hervin, Jeremy Reeves, and Chris Godwin. My original sleeper last year was going to be Darnell Savage Jr., a player who at one point was considered a likely 4th round pick, but ended up rising all the way to pick 21 to the Packers and was no longer a sleeper of mine. And South Carolina's Michael Thomas, or should I say Bryan Edwards, deserves to rise up draft boards just as much. Also an expected 4th round pick, Bryan Edwards looks like a top receiver in this class, and in my honest opinion, looks like a 2nd round pick at worst. Since football started last year in August, I began searching for the right player who could satisfy my hunger for my top sleeper, since those are my favorite prospects to find. And finally, I found him. Listen, I know it's rather bold to compare Bryan Edwards to Michael Thomas. He isn't as good as Michael Thomas right now, and MT isn't the perfect comparison for Bryan Edwards, but let's just jump into the scouting report and maybe you'll see how I see Michael Thomas when I watch Bryan Edwards. Before we even get to the film, however, I wanted to shout out Marcus Mosher on Twitter. While I was watching Bryan Edwards, I happened to stumble across this beauty of a statistic. This graph you see here is a list of wide receivers with a 47% dominator rating with a breakout age of 18.5 or younger. The worst player on here is Jordan Matthews, and there are other stars like Amari Cooper, Miles Austin, DJ Moore, and Keenan Allen. But along with these great athletes, you see the name Bryan Edwards. All these players have broken out and become stars, and I think Bryan Edwards easily could if he is given the chance. And while that statistic is insanely exciting, it's just a statistic. It doesn't guarantee success for an NFL prospect. So, let's jump into his film. Despite average quarterback play, Bryan Edwards was a reception monster for South Carolina, just like Michael Thomas is for the Saints. 2019 2nd round pick and former South Carolina teammate Deebo Samuel was great in college, but was even getting outperformed by a younger Bryan Edwards. Bryan Edwards was targeted a lot and was honestly the biggest spark of that offense as a wide receiver. He's extremely versatile as well. He can catch screens because he has enough speed and is phenomenal at gaining yardage after the reception. You give him the ball, he has a chance to take it to the house every time. He's a good route runner and is able to get open often, despite the fact he isn't as fast as, say, Henry Ruggs or Jalen Reagor. If he doesn't get open on his route, Bryan Edwards won't stand on the end of his route like some receivers tend to do. He moves around and tries to be a playmaker and get open for his quarterback. Another reason he's so good at making plays is because he's good at using his hands to get off of press coverage at the line of scrimmage. Even if he runs a slower than expected 40-yard dash, Bryan Edwards is good enough at getting open that him falling in the draft would only hurt the other 31 teams who passed on him. Another similarity I drew between Michael Thomas and Bryan Edwards is how Bryan Edwards can make any catch. Sure, Bryan Edwards has made some phenomenal receptions in his time at South Carolina, and I mean some phenomenal receptions. But I mean that when he catches the ball, he won't drop it because he takes a hit from a receiver. He does drop the ball a little too often, but it won't be just because he takes a big hit. In fact, he almost gives hits when he runs with the ball. He plays so hard, and it only made me fall in love with him even more. He takes contact, and he fights to gain any extra yardage. And while he isn't the best blocker in the world, he's definitely not bad at blocking cornerbacks during running plays. The only negatives in his play include him dropping the ball every once in a while, just like Juju Smith-Schuster, Julio Jones, Demaryius Thomas, and so many other receivers in college who still turn into phenomenal pros. And the other is the fact that Bryan Edwards can sometimes lose awareness and doesn't always know that the ball is coming his way. He could look at the quarterback more often when running routes, but sometimes his issue is on the quarterback as well. I'm excited to see how his length and speed look at the combine, because man, if he doesn't rise up draft boards, I will be shocked. I honestly believe Bryan Edwards deserves to be a first or early second round pick. Give him an opportunity in the NFL and he will succeed. Take out those statistics I showed you and the film still shows me the same thing. He's the receiver who gets no talk but deserves almost all of it. I love Bryan Edwards and I encourage you to watch his film as well. Jump on the Bryan Edwards train while you can and you won't regret it.